Welcome back to On the Move with Victor Shi. Today is Thursday, March 2nd, which is, again, hard to believe that it's already March of 2023. We have a very exciting episode today with Representative Adam Schiff from California. He'll join me in about 5 minutes to talk about everything that is happening in the House, as well as his run for the Senate. So until then, let's talk about some of the news of the day. There is a lot that has gone on since even yesterday. Yesterday in the Senate, there was a hearing into. I guess it wasn't a hearing. They brought in the Judiciary Committee brought in Attorney General Merrick Garland for questioning. And what we saw yesterday was, honestly, from the Democratic side, this is a tradition that I'm glad is being brought back. Bringing in the Attorney General for questioning. But what we saw on the Republican side was, to me, one of the most revolting things that I've seen in the Senate. You saw people like Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley in particular, and other Republican senators who were totally comfortable with spreading lies, spreading misinformation during the hearing about what the FBI and what the DOJ are doing. And more importantly, what you saw during that hearing was Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley showing just this level of disrespect that I've never seen in a Congress in terms of how they treat witnesses. Ted Cruz yesterday was yelling. He was shouting. He basically was a bully yesterday during the hearing for Merrick Garland. Merrick Garland tried to get one or two words in, couldn't get it in because Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley were both, speaking right over him. I mean, it was just really just childish, really pathetic behavior. And, for anyone who kind of is wondering what this Republican Party is like, just their treatment, how they treat people, their basic decency and human, I think it's really embarrassing. I think we have Representative Schiff here with us. Hi there.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good.
Wonderful. So we have a lot to get to, and I want to start off by asking you what Republicans are doing to committees, because earlier this year, Kevin McCarthy booted you off the House Intelligence Committee, where you previously served as both ranking member and chair. But at the same time, he's elevating voices like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert. So I'm wondering, why do you think Kevin McCarthy is kicking off people like you and amplifying far-right extreme voices like Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, etc.?
Well, tragically, because he needed the votes of the crazies in his conference in order to become speaker, and he was willing to essentially deal away not just the powers of the speakership, but also its responsibilities. And so, yes, to placate Marjorie Taylor Greene, I was removed from the Intelligence Committee. To placate the Matt Gaetzes and others of his conference, they're apparently releasing video, or at least showing video, thousands of hours of video of security footage to Tucker Carlson, someone who promoted January 6th deep state conspiracy theories, that this was an effort somehow to embarrass Donald Trump, not an attack that he incited on the Capitol. And there are tragically going to be a lot more instances to come. The very formation of this select committee on the so-called weaponization of the federal government, another promise to the deep state conspiracy theorists in his conference. He's going to destroy the House, and he is a long way to doing so in order to keep the title speaker. But it's not going to be much of a title if he destroys the institution.
You mentioned the weaponization of government subcommittee, which is currently, we're starting to see the consequences of giving Republicans like Jim Jordan and other election deniers power. And they've already opened investigations into people like Hunter Biden, Pete Buttigieg, Alejandro Mayorkas, the DHS secretary. I'm wondering, based off of your experience as a prosecutor and also someone who led what I believe was a real and legitimate investigation and impeachment proceeding, are any of the things that Republicans are doing right now legitimate, or is it all political vengeance for politics?
I'm sure that you can, if you look hard enough, find something that they're doing that is worthwhile. I'm not sure that I've seen it yet. There are, I think, some members of the Republican conference that don't want to be led around by their crazies. So they want to look into legitimate issues. Sure. Now, I'm sure that even when they do that, they will do it in a highly politicized way designed to embarrass the administration. But, if you take, for example, the issue of inflation, that's a real problem affecting millions of Americans. It's something we need to deal with. And it's frankly something that Democrats have been addressing. And we passed major legislation to bring down inflation. And there's a lot more that we can do. We can put a windfall profits tax on oil companies like I've proposed in legislation in the last session. But while I think the Republicans will look into that issue they will do so in kind of a gotcha way to try to make the point that Congress has no responsibility for inflation. It's all on the hands of the president, when in fact there's a lot we can do in Congress to address it. So I think they will take on some legitimate issues. How they do it will be very much subject to question, but it will be overshadowed by all of these crazy investigations, all of the endless umpteen investigations of Hunter Biden's laptop. Tragically, while there are legitimate things to look into, I don't think the country wants the entire time of the Congress spent on Hunter Biden's laptop.
Yeah, definitely not. I want to go back to the policy and the type of legislation that we're seeing from Republicans. I'm wondering, can you give our audience a sense of what Republicans have introduced so far in terms of policy and legislation, and what that indicates about what the Republican policy agenda is right now?
Well, if you look at one of the first bills that they introduced when they took back the majority, it was essentially to defund the IRS, or at least part of the IRS. We had expanded resources available to catch, wealthy individuals or corporations cheating on their taxes. That would have saved the Treasury billions and billions of dollars. One of their first acts was to repeal that funding, try to do away with it, so that wealthy tax cheats can continue to get away with what they're doing. That may suit their very wealthy donors, but what it means is that their claims of concern over the deficit and debt don't extend to when wealthy people don't pay their taxes. So that was, I think, a very early sign that so much of what this party is beholden to is extremely wealthy interests. If you look at what they did when they controlled the Congress previously during the last administration, their signature achievement, if you can call it that, was not infrastructure. We had 4 years of infrastructure week with no infrastructure, but rather to cut taxes on the wealthiest Americans and on large corporations. And their first step now in taking over the House is to try to further increase the wealth of people doing really well by allowing them not to pay taxes. So that's one clear illustration of where their policy priorities are. Those policy priorities are being certainly demonstrated amply in the Congress, but also in the courts, where Republican attorney generals are litigating to stop student debt forgiveness. This is another priority. Yes, they want to make sure that people can, if they're doing really well and wealthy, get away with not paying their taxes, but they want to make sure that no student gets any help with their student debt. That's a very different kind of priority than we have as Democrats, but you can see it front and center in their agenda.
Yeah. The one last question I have about the House right now. I mean, for Democrats, I'm so grateful that Hakeem Jeffries is the leader, but, and there's good legislation being introduced, but it seems like nothing will first get the Republicans to vote for it. And second, there seems to be little that Democrats can do to block what Republicans are trying to do, get out of the House. Luckily, there's the Senate, which probably won't pass there. But what is the strategy among Democrats for pushing back against what Republicans are doing right now and getting voters to understand where this Republican Party falls?
Well, our strategy is, I think, twofold. On the legislative front, it's to put forth good policy. And if we can't get it passed, at least put the Republicans on record of having to vote it down. And so each time a bill comes to the floor where they allow a rule that is open to amendment, we offer numerous amendments to express our priorities. And they may vote them down, and they do vote most of them down. But it demonstrates to the American people where they're really coming from, what their real priorities are. And to give you an illustration, in the Judiciary Committee this week, we adopted the rules of the committee. Now, they wrote those rules without consulting with the minority party. They wrote those rules in a very different fashion than normal. Normally, the rules are non-controversial. They simply say, we're going to oversee this, we're going to oversee that, and they're fairly neutral. This time, though, their rules would include basic conclusions that they wanted to reach. We will oversee the bias against conservative agents at the FBI, or we'll oversee, and they would basically state some right-wing deep state conspiracy theory and posit it as if they're overseeing the fact of its existence. And, in response, we, of course, sought to remove the offending language. But more than that, I offered an amendment, for example, to say that we should oversee the increase in domestic violent terrorism, characterized by bigotry against the AAPI community, anti-Semitism, and
Yeah.
white nationalism. Now,
Right.
you would think that that would be relatively non-controversial. But one of the Republicans from North Carolina took issue with it, claimed that I was merely being woke, and asked what AAPI stood for, and had a problem. Republicans had problems singling out anti-Semitism,
Oh,
and it shows where they're coming from.
yeah.
The predominant domestic terrorism threat in the United States now. Comes from white nationalism, comes from right-wing extremism. In fact, the number one terrorism threat to the country, period, doesn't come from overseas, doesn't come from Al-Qaeda. It comes from within.
Yeah.
And yet they don't want to oversee this, apparently, because, as one of the Republicans said, it describes half the country. And I took issue with that. And I said, I hope you're not suggesting that half the country engages in anti-Semitism,
Right.
anti-AAPI
No.
hate, and white nationalism, because that's certainly not my view.
Wow. I mean, that is astonishing. And it's really just concerning that these simple things that they can't agree on, things like calling out racism, calling out anti-Semitism, even knowing what API means is, I mean, I would laugh, but it's really serious for Republican officials not to acknowledge this, because that's what gives these incidents fuel. And it's just really embarrassing. But while the House is a mess, there's something that is also giving me hope right now, which is your run for the US Senate. You've served in the House since 2001, I believe. So I'm wondering why you think serving in the Senate right now is a better use of your time.
I think that I've demonstrated leadership in the House in standing up to a corrupt president and leading the investigation of that corrupt president, leading the first impeachment trial, to the first bipartisan vote to remove a president in history, and then in a leadership role in the January 6th committee.
Yeah.
And it's unusual for a House member to have those kind of responsibilities, and I was proud to undertake them. I'll be proud to bring that leadership to the U.S. Senate and fight not just for our democracy, but also for an economy that works for everyone. To me, these issues have always been deeply intertwined, that the threat to our democracy springs from an economy that simply isn't working for millions of people. When you can't afford a roof over your head, or you are saddled your whole life with student debt, or you can't afford healthcare or have access to healthcare, people start to question, is democracy the right model? They start to be vulnerable to a demagogue who comes along and promises that he alone can fix things. When I was a kid, my father was a clothing salesman. He was kind of a proverbial traveling salesman. On his income, which was $18,000, we could afford our first home, which cost $18,000.
Wow. Yeah.
Imagine today trying to buy a house for your annual income as a clothing salesman. And it just shows how much our economy has changed in ways that make it very hard for hardworking Americans. During the pandemic, I was very proud to champion more than doubling the child tax credit. That simple step lifted 40% of the kids who were living in poverty in the country out of poverty. But when Republicans allowed that to lapse, then millions of families fell back into poverty. And these are conscious policy decisions we're making. And I want to be a champion in the Senate, fighting for an economy that works for everyone, fighting for student loan relief, fighting for access to good quality universal health care. And also, and this to me is the third existential issue in addition to our economy, our democracy, and that is the planet. Fighting for aggressive action to tackle climate change, which we made a very sizable investment in the Inflation Reduction Act, most sizable in our history, but we have so much more to do to attack that problem.
Yeah, I'm very optimistic, and those issues are also really important to young people as well. Knowing that we have elected officials who actually believe in addressing climate change and those issues is definitely assuring. But at the same time, the Senate, as both you and I know, and I think many in our audience know, has a lot of rather maybe broken, archaic rules. Most notably, the filibuster. If you're elected, would you be okay with doing away with the filibuster?
Yes, absolutely. For years, I've advocated doing away with the filibuster. That this archaic rule that in the past was used for such pernicious purposes to perpetuate Jim Crow, for example, should be used once again to perpetuate a new generation of Jim Crow, to essentially make it impossible to pass voting rights legislation or protect a woman's reproductive freedom, to me is just unconscionable. And I intend to be a fierce champion of doing away with the filibuster. We need to elect more Democrats committed to doing that. We have a couple in the Senate right now who won't do it. And I find it inexplicable.
Yeah.
But that to me is going to be job number one, because what's foundational in our democracy is voting rights. And Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy and others have for years attempted, as well as Republicans at the state level around the country, to disenfranchise people, and particularly people of color, by putting new barriers in the way of voting, very deliberate barriers targeted at communities of color. And if we're going to stop that as a nation, then we need to pass voting rights. And the only way to do that is going to be getting rid of the filibuster. So to me, that is essential for that, but for so many other vital reforms.
Absolutely. That's wonderful to hear. And you're in a crowded race already with Katie Porter and Barbara Lee, who I'm sure you've worked closely with over the past few years as the California delegation in the House. If you were to pitch to people why people should vote for you over Katie Porter or Barbara Lee, what would that be?
Well, first, I would say I think my colleagues are terrific, and the voters will have a great choice among three wonderful progressive Democrats. I think what sets me apart is the record I have of leadership, of being in the center of some of the most consequential fights for the soul of our nation in the last decade. Fights to preserve our democracy, fights to make the economy work for everyone. And I have a proven track record of not only leadership in those fights, but also getting things done for Californians. And I think the reason why Speaker Pelosi and now more than half of the California delegation of House members have endorsed my campaign, along with over 100 state officials and local officials up and down the state, is because I have a record of getting things done. And you can't be progressive without making progress. At the end of the day, I think what Americans want is they want a safe neighborhood. They want access to quality health care. They want good public schools. They want a chance at the American dream. And they want people who will help deliver, not just talk about, but help deliver on these promises. And I think that's where my strength comes in.
Absolutely. And where can our audience go to help out? Is there any volunteering, phone banking, any opportunities for people to get involved?
Absolutely. They can go to adamschiff.com. We kept it very simple, adamschiff.com. And people can get involved. I've been just in the last couple of weeks in about a dozen cities throughout the state. And so on our website, you can learn information about where I'm going to be. You can get involved in the campaign and volunteer. You can make donations. This is going to be, I think, one of the largest grassroots campaigns in our state's history. And I would love for your viewers to be involved.
Yeah, and I know a lot of the peers that I talk to here at UCLA are very excited for this race, and I'm excited for your candidacy, and it'll definitely be exciting. And I'm grateful for your running in this race, because, like you said, I think you have a extraordinary record of leadership and also accomplishments, and so it's going to be a really exciting race, and I look forward to seeing the eventual outcome. But thank you so much, Representative Schiff, for joining me this morning. Well,
thank you. Great to be with you. Thank you for the wonderful work that you do.
Thanks so much. Have a good one. Well, Representative Schiff is always great. I remember the first time I saw him was during the first impeachment hearing, and just the way that he conducted himself during that hearing. And then obviously after that, he's been just a democracy warrior, working on another impeachment and then doing the January 6th hearings. I mean, it's really remarkable, just his leadership. And like you said, he's also someone who has really accomplished a lot for the state of California and for democracy in general. And so, this is a race where Katie Porter, Barbara Lee, those are two amazing candidates. I know next week, just as a little teaser for all of you, we're going to have on Barbara Lee to talk about her candidacy and why she believes she is the person to lead California. So don't miss that. But it'll be an exciting race. I'm thinking about actually flipping my registration, and you all should tell me. I'm from Illinois originally, so in the presidential election, there's not much to be said. I mean, both states are going to go blue in 2024, but there is this Senate race in Illinois. There is, I guess, some interesting down ballot races. But should I switch my registration to California? Let me know. I think this Senate race is really making me excited, and I really want to help choose who the next senators will be. But Illinois is also one of those states that's really important, and so we'll see. But let me know what you think, and I'll maybe go based off the poll. Just a couple of other things I want to get to before we end for today. First of all, it's Women's History Month. Just want to put that out there. And throughout this month, just want to kind of honor and celebrate and elevate and amplify women and the extraordinary work that they've done. People like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, people in history who have done just extraordinary work to help make women's rights possible. Gloria Steinem. I mean, all of these amazing women who are just kind of doing the work and really making sure that we live in a society where women and men enjoy the same rights. The other day, Jill Wine-Banks and I, we were talking to Allison Gill about the importance of the Equal Rights Amendment, and what better way to celebrate women and their contributions to society than to pass the Equal Rights Amendment and enshrine it into the law as the 28th Amendment this March. So happy Women's History Month to all who celebrate. For Republicans who are trying to celebrate Women's History Month, it's honestly quite sickening knowing that they don't respect women's bodily autonomy, their reproductive rights. They literally want to strip women away of their bodily autonomy, yet they still celebrate Women's History Month, which is laughable on its face, honestly. One other thing that I thought was really interesting that I saw yesterday, was actually more disturbing than interesting, was Tucker Carlson interviewed Kyle Rittenhouse. Kyle Rittenhouse is obviously the person who went to Kenosha and ended up shooting multiple people and killing them. And yesterday, Kyle Rittenhouse was on Tucker Carlson, basically pleading for money for his lawsuit. There's a lawsuit against him right now, and he was on Tucker Carlson's show pleading for money. And it was just one of those moments where you have someone like Tucker Carlson, who has been the chief promoter of lies and conspiracy theories on his show, platforming someone like Kyle Rittenhouse. And to me, Kyle Rittenhouse is everything that the Republican Party wants to see in a young person. He's white, he's straight, he's Christian, he's racist. He's someone who literally matches what the Republican Party wants to see in the future. And, they use Kyle Rittenhouse as someone who is basically a confirmation and a validation that what they're trying to do is working. But let me be clear. Kyle Rittenhouse is not representative of Gen Z. He is someone who is an evil person. He's a terrible person. He is the poster child of truly, I think, white privilege, white power. He's someone who Gen Z is not very fond of. And for Republicans to elevate this voice, they're trying to make it seem like all young people are like that, when in reality, they aren't. So for all of us, I think what we can do is, have the conversations with young people, make sure that they realize that this is who the Republican Party is elevating as their spokesperson for young people, and just know that this is not what young people stand for. Continue calling them out for this, continue calling out for their absurdities. What Kyle Rittenhouse is trying to say is really dangerous and revolting. So just make sure that you know that what Kyle Rittenhouse is doing right now is not reflective of what Gen Z believes in. We still have a lot of hope with the young people. I think we can't give up, but don't listen to those like Tucker Carlson and those like Kyle Rittenhouse. It's just not representative of the country at all. That's all I have for you today. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode with Representative Schiff, who is always, always amazing. And we will be back tomorrow for another episode of On the Move with Simon Rosenberg, who I'm sure many of you might have seen on Twitter throughout the 2022 midterm election. He got things right when most people didn't. So we'll talk about what happened in 2022, as well as looking forward to 2024, what Democrats have to do to win not only the presidency, but also hold onto control in the Senate, maybe expand the Senate, as well as flip control of the House, and also some of the down ballot races, what that strategy should be, how we can counter Republicans effectively. It'll be a fire episode, so don't miss that. That's going to be at 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern time, right here on youtube.com/Politicon. You do not want to miss that. And like I said, next week, we already have some packed guests for you. Don't miss that. We have members of Congress. We have Representative Barbara Lee, who will talk about her run, as well as some other great guests. So you don't want to miss that. But I will see you all tomorrow. Have a great rest of your Thursday, and thanks so much for watching today.